Hola amigas, ¿qué tal? Yo soy Saif Savage, vengo del Laboratorio de Innovación Cívica de la UNAM y ahorita hicimos una increíble colaboración con Epic Queen para traerles las conferencias de RIIAA. ¿Qué es RIIAA? RIIAA es una conferencia internacional en donde trajimos a expertos de inteligencia artificial para platicarles a ustedes, audiencias de Latinoamérica, mujeres y hombres, sobre cómo pueden utilizar la inteligencia artificial para impactar a la sociedad y hacer cambio a gran escala. Ahorita vamos a tener unas pláticas con expertos de inteligencia artificial dentro del sector salud, que están utilizando la inteligencia artificial para revolucionar cómo es que los pacientes acceden a la salud y también incluso utilizar inteligencia artificial para ayudar a personas con discapacidad. Van a ver a speakers que vienen de Apple, Carnegie Mellon University, Fitbit y Google, y IBM. Va a estar increíble esto. Vamos a empezar. Entonces voy aquí a compartir mi pantalla. Y, ok, application, window. Y ahorita, entonces, ustedes ya van a empezar a escuchar.
God knows how many different departments that are distributed across the world, right? So the biggest problem that we do have right now is that we are having all of this distributed data that live across different parts of the world, and not only they are generated in a daily basis on a distributed fashion, but they keep being, more and more data keep being generated in that similar fashion, especially if you think about how, the new era of collecting data is going to be happening through actually, the different people measuring many things about themselves and recording them in a distributed fashion. So you're not only looking at data are going to be generated in different hospital sites or in different organization sites, you're actually looking at the data is going to be generated and be living with each and every person on every mobile device, right? Now, apart from the distributed and scalable nature of the data, you also have issues with the fact that the data are being generated in different types, different formats, different standards, right? And a lot of times they tend to be quite sparse, so they are not complete data, and they tend to end up being siloed within different companies and organizations. Now, apart from all of these two things, the last thing that it's a big limitation that we have is that very few people understand the meaning behind this data, right? So this data is highly complex. So it's not that easy, especially as you're moving from, if you're measuring how many steps you're taking a day, or maybe, where do you have pain in your body, that's fairly easy to understand. But as you're moving towards what could be certain genetic mutations, how they're linked, what pathways they're activating, how now these biological pathways and functions end up influencing a disease, and then how does the disease progress, then you can understand that these data are becoming, more and more complex. And currently, we have quite a lot of companies that have been actually, using very standard ways of basically profiling drugs, by which they will just give a drug to someone within a clinical trial or even before that, and then we'll just measure simple toxicity levels, so how bad the drug is on you on the basis of certain phenotypes that we're measuring, or how different other symptoms of how you are feeling today, and if you're feeling pain or not, if you are vomiting or not, and so on and so forth. As you can understand, that's very, very, very superficial, and we don't only do that at the level of clinical trials, we also do that at the level of drug design. Even when we're designing drugs in the first place, we are only looking at the very simple chemistry of it and how well the drug is binding to different sites, but nothing beyond that, nothing that has to do with the biology. So we have a lot of companies that are very good at doing that, say at the level of clinical trials and humans disease, but also at the level of when you are chemically designing a drug. but we do have less and less and fewer companies where they actually do apply advanced AI, a lot of different data, and now they understand how a drug from the moment is being injected to a cell line, right, to your even cell, not even just your body, how that is actually creating changes to the way your genes are being expressed, and therefore to the ways that different proteins and peptides are being generated within the cell lines, and then eventually how that is all responding and is changing how the different cells behave, and therefore how the different organs behave, and how the different humans actually behave. And that is what Lifebeat is doing. So Lifebeat has, we work with distributed data, and we have built an infrastructure that can solve both problems. It can actually be able to unify data that live on different locations, but at the same time, bring advanced AI that can actually reason and understand what is biologically happening every time a new drug is introduced, not just to a human, but also to every cell line of that human. And our core technology ranges from providing cloud-based functionalities that can actually help around two areas, identifying patients and different cohorts of patients that have specific characteristics, both clinical and genetic characteristics, therefore being able to then target particular drugs that would be more useful and effective for these individuals, a set of then different analytics by which we can analyze and extract different insights, and then from there ranging to advanced AI suite that can actually predict long-term what is going to be the different effects of the different drugs. Now, when we are looking at the how our AI technology specifically is working, where we start with data, everything starts with data. So we do a lot of data sanitization, a lot of data standardization. Then we continue with what we call federated and continuous analysis and learning of the data. So basically, we process this data in a way that we bring the computation to wherever the data live, and then we extract different insights, and then we unify those. And then we apply advanced models, deep learning models, by which we then start simulating how the different cells respond to different drugs. And from there, we go to basically creating almost like a digital twin of the different cells and eventually of the different organs in humans. And then from there, we are able to then predict what's going to be the response to different drugs. And then by tapping to the already known knowledge base, we can actually verify and be confident how good that prediction is. And oops, there seems to be a problem with my slides. So sorry for that. There seems to be some sort of slide problem. So anyhow, to achieve all of this, we use many different publicly available data, but like this big collection of data where different drugs were actually screened against many different cell lines. But what's the most important is that we use a lot of proprietary data, and even when we take publicly available data, is how we process this data to standardize them across different confounding factors. More importantly, then we actually we use our models to then screen different drugs and then be able to interrogate our models to actually predict what a particular drug does, what is the disease that it can target, and what is the safety of that drug. What we do expect that drug to have a side effects within the different humans, basically. And then we use, as I said, more repeating what I just said, then once we deliver those predictions, then we have really incredible ways by which we can actually validate these predictions. We assign confidence level by tapping to all of the existing knowledge, right? Where we query all of the existing journals, patents, drug bank informations, databases about particular pathways, mode of actions of the different drugs and the diseases. And then we try to identify any information that's already known that is actually validating the predictions that we're giving. And then that is what we eventually deliver to our pharma clients, and then eventually those predictions are being used to decide which drug should be taken further into clinical trials. And with that, I want to thank all of you, and then I'll just stop sharing here my presentation. I guess we're going to go for more questions later.
Yes. Thank you, Maria. Questions will be at the end. Please remember to send any question to menti.com with the number that shared Natalia. Now, we will listen to Jeffrey Beacon from the Carnegie Mellon University, who works on accessibility, crowdsourcing, and human computation projects. Please, Jeffrey. Oh, I see you solved the problem. Thank you.
I hope so. I hope I didn't screw up my audio or something else in the process, but thank you so much. So let's see. I believe you should be able to see my slides.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me here. So my name's Jeff, and I'm from Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. And my discipline is computer science, and in particular, human-computer interaction. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is a little bit about how we think about human-computer interaction applied for people with disabilities and how AI really is important for this. And so in doing this, I want to introduce kind of this field of accessibility first. And so accessibility is the field that in computing or technology where we consider how do we make all of this great technology, the devices, products, and services that we develop accessible so that anybody can use them regardless of their ability. And sometimes I think people errantly see this as being niche, so affecting, say, a small number of people. And so, people try to motivate accessibility in a number of different ways. So it turns out that a lot of people actually have disabilities. So about 15% of the US population is one statistic that we cite, probably a little higher even over the entire world. Most of us will actually have a disability at some time in our life if we're lucky enough to live long enough to do that. Situational impairments affect us all. So if we're driving or walking down the street, our attention isn't the same, our motor dexterity isn't the same, our visual acuity isn't the same. And ultimately, accessibility is also a value, something that I think that we just need to make sure that all of the great technology that we're developing is accessible to everyone. And all of these are true, and yet as a technologist, one of the ways that I think about accessibility is the functional way that it's not niche. And so to me, the niche is this kind of narrow way in which people assume people will interact with devices, technology, services that we develop. So often that means, very high motor dexterity and high resolution visual acuity. And so if we think about that, this tiny little dot here that I had on the slide is not accessibility. And, every other way that you might imagine interacting with our devices is what I would consider to be accessibility. So it's quite expansive. And accessibility as a field, I think really came out of, HCI, out of the story of HCI itself. And so if we look at the big moments in HCI, and so this is things like, Engelbart's mother of all demos, where, in one massive demo, they were able to introduce the development of spreadsheets and the computer mouse and collaborative social software and all these things all in one thing. Very amazing. Or if you look at what Park was able to do with the development of windowing systems and kind of this forebearer of the graphical user interface that we kind of take for granted. If we look back at this, there's a fundamental trade-off that was made, in which I argue we keep making. And the idea is that to enable this deep and sustained progress, we lock in certain abilities. And so this keeps happening. So here's a video, which I'm not sure the audio will work perfectly on, but
we're going to use the best pointing device in the world. We're going to use a pointing device that we're all born with. We're born with 10 of them. We're going to use our fingers.
Right. And so obviously the iPhone is a big deal, and it was a huge innovation when it came out. And at the same time, right, again, it kind of locked in this a slightly different set of ability assumptions. When I consider this, right, like there's this kind of classic like picture of, how do our devices see us? And it's kind of like this big finger, our mobile devices see us as having kind of this one big finger, one eye where we can't use our stereo vision very well, kind of little ears because we do listen to things, but we're not able to kind of leverage the full 3D range of what we might be able to otherwise hear. And so this is kind of like what I jokingly refer to as HCI's original sin. And we want to kind of relax away those ability assumptions. It's actually a really set of really hard problems. And this is where I think AI almost necessarily has to come in, because we're trying to do things like convert to and from any modality. If you're not able to see, we need to convert that information to a different form. How do we do that? Well, AI is probably going to be one of the best answers we have here. There's a huge scale of legacy problems, so there's just massive amounts of different technologies and applications and things that are already out that are not accessible in a variety of different ways, and so we have to somehow adapt those. Again, scale AI, understanding people well enough to even know what they might benefit from, right? So this is another thing where we can observe what people are doing, how they're interacting. Maybe we can match them with technologies that they might benefit from. And then as we develop AI technologies, we also need to be really aware and cognizant of how we are potentially introducing new ability assumptions. And so in the last couple of minutes of this talk, I just want to show you a couple videos and that will hopefully get you thinking about how this might be applied. So the first is a project that we worked on called Dyslexia, and the idea is that from your phone, you should be able to, your phone can actually provide this interface to otherwise inaccessible physical interfaces that turns out are pervasive throughout the world. So I'm going to play this short video of some examples and how it works. All right, so that would be a way that a person who is blind would be able to interact with these devices that just weren't designed with these different abilities in mind. And I like to end on this laser cutter here, because some people are like, a blind person using a laser cutter, and I'm always like, hell yeah, a blind person using a laser cutter, right? Like, we should really be breaking down all these barriers. So example 2, turns out there's just a huge number of people who don't know that they have maybe an underlying condition, or that they could benefit from different accessibility services. And so one of the projects we worked on for the last few years is in dyslexia detection. And so the idea here is that we have kids mostly, but people play games, and then based on their interactions in those games, we're able to predict whether somebody's likely to have dyslexia or not, and then suggest various kinds of supports or accessibility features that they might benefit from. It's kind of hard to see the details, but the idea is she's selecting between these different options of correct and incorrectly spelled words that were designed in a way that we know people with and without dyslexia are likely to observe differences in. And then the final example I have is, as we're developing AI technology, I think the tendency is to kind of make the same mistake again, where we kind of focus on maybe the norm of this distribution, and yet abilities, human abilities, come just a wide number of wide types of varieties. And so in this case, I want to show just what it's like for someone to try to interact with Siri if they stutter.
Siri, add Okay, I'm trying one more time. I'm gonna try stutter again. Siri, add pay my bill to my task list. That's not nice. So it thought it said, this is so embarrassing. It thought it said poop, 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 paper, Mumbai, but the bill to my desk tasks of a little of the West.
And so as we develop speech recognition technology, we need to be aware that people speak in different ways. And so the systems, especially as we become more reliant on, say, speech directed systems, we should be able to make models that recognize speech, like many of us were able to do that just isn't quite in that normative distribution yet can be completely understandable. So how do we make sure we get ahead of that? So these are sort of just a set of problems that I think kind of illustrate at least some concrete examples of where accessibility and AI intersect, and hopefully kind of highlight how there's a big opportunity and an important set of problems here that we can work on to make sure that we don't repeat the past mistakes and actually do even better for everyone.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. I have to tell you that I feel particularly attracted to this accessibility project, considering that increasing incidence of chronic diseases in developed and developing countries is deriving also in an increasing incidence of disabling complications and people losing jobs. So just to close the panel presentations, we will listen to Pablo Meyer, research staff at the IBM Computational Biology Center. He works in the area of computational biology focused on molecular and cellular level events. Thank you for being here, Pablo.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. Let me just start this. And thanks for putting it together with this panel. I think we're really kind of aligned in the sense of, what to do with all this data that's coming, and also where to look for things that are being ignored. So thank you, Maria and Ben, for sharing. And also I thank the organizers for putting this together. And too bad we cannot be in Mexico, but we feel much closer this way. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about a crowdsourcing project that has been going on for a little bit more than 10 years. It was started at IBM, but it's really owned by the people that participate and that organize challenges. And right now it is run by Sage Bio-Networks, which is a nonprofit interested in data and bringing back data to patients when they're giving it away. And so, why crowdsourcing, and what is crowdsourcing? In a way, I mean, we're presenting challenges to people so that they bring solutions. And you could see this in different ways. You could see that, crowdsourcing is more like this, right? So where we are having, the organizers are having all the benefits of people working for you. I prefer to see it as something this way where, both organizers and people that are solving problems are kind of working together and we really become a community. I even have a better image for this that comes from, the country where I come from, which is Mexico, which is a piñata. I really feel that a piñata, without the people hitting the piñata, makes no sense. But also we need the people that make the piñata, which is, putting it at the correct height, making it fun, and putting things that are well curated inside. And so this is what we do at DREAM. We trying to find piñatas around the world, data, so that we can set up problems and invite people to the party. And we hope that everybody comes and keeps the piñata, helping break it so that everybody has fun. So DREAM has been going on for the past, since 2007. It really started as a one-man show organized by Gustavo Stolovitsky. These are all the challenges that we have done. I think our particularity is that we're really close to the people that solve the challenges, even if they had never participated before, because we all become authors in papers, and this is really kind of the main output. And of course, sharing the data that we use, sharing the code, and implement it in easy ways. These are the topics that come out of what I just showed you. We of course use a lot of genomic data. We are interested in predicting, inferring parameters in cancer, in disease, and it is started as a network reverse engineering, hence the name. It's Dialogue for Reverse Engineering and Methods. We have organized about 40 challenges. We have more than 20,000 registered participants and have published a bunch of papers. And we really would like to see us as, a team. And so we have our own citation page. We are the Bourbakis of, computational biology and healthcare. Data. we've got a relatively good career in terms of citation and indexes for those who like to count everything. But really, it's all about the people. One particularity also that I would say is we're not a company. We do give sometimes prize monies when we are in alliance with foundations, but it's really mostly academic, and it's about the science and solving problems together. So also when we say crowdsourcing, we can have all the way from 10 to 100 or 200 teams participating and sending solutions to challenges, but it does vary a lot. So I just want to describe a few of my the challenges I like the most, and then I'll just concentrate in a single one, which is kind of what Benjamin Sanchez, who invited me to this panel, wanted me to describe. So this is the first challenge I'll describe, and it's called a wholesale parameter estimation challenge. So the idea is a little bit like what Maria was discussing. In biology, we have a lot of different types of data, genomics, proteomics, phosphorylation. We also have a lot of different types of models. We have, ODE models. We have stochastic modeling. Now, machine learning is, of course, a big part of it. And so the idea of this challenge was, can you try to infer the parameters for a large model of mycoplasma, which is a bacterial organism, one of the smallest ones. It only has about 400 genes. So can we actually put together a model that predicts the data, but can we actually predict which are the best parameters to do this? And when I talk about parameters here, the model had about 1,500 parameters, which, for a physicist is horrible. But we know that, in artificial intelligence, there are different ways of learning parameters, but we're not afraid of having many parameters to try to model some. The second challenge I want to describe briefly is this olfaction prediction challenge. This is a very different type of challenge. And again, one of the problems when you organize these challenges is that we want sets of unpublished data, and we want to push the border of knowledge in biology and trying to marry people that are generating new interesting data on fields that haven't really been studied with people that are trying to solve problems and trying to get a new problem. So one of the things we do at DREAM is we really curate the data. We do an initial assessment of how good the data is, because as you know, garbage in, garbage out. And we try to find interesting problems. And this was a particularly interesting problem, which is trying to predict how humans are going to rate the smell of molecules using 20 words. And there was no human psychophysics data set trying to rate molecules. This was the largest data set, and also, when you think about artificial intelligence, in particular deep networks, you do think about a lot of data. While the largest data set here was only 50 people smelling 500 molecules. So this is the largest available public data set that existed, and at that time it was non-published, because of course this is also an important thing for the assessment of the algorithms. We want at least part of the data to be non-published, non-publicly available, in order to really be able to assess how good the predictions are, and avoiding any type of overfitting and things like that. So this was a pretty successful challenge, and again, 20 teams participated, but the models were really predictive, and this is the first time they would show that you actually you can now know how a pure molecule is going to smell like, right? It would be like the frequency of light or of sound. Going on to the different topics, this is a challenge we organized together with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This is about malaria, right? There are a lot of models that are being developed around cancer using genomics, and cancer is probably one of the most modeled diseases, but there's basically no interest, or there's no community around trying to use gene expression, and a little bit what Maria was saying, in malaria. And so we were able to get a data set of in vitro data of responses to drugs, the malaria parasite, but also in vivo data, and try to predict, based on the gene expression of the parasite, at which drug were you going to be able to kill it. Finally, this is a more kind of genomics challenge. So the idea was here, we always had the RIIAA, because we're always trying to follow new types of data that are coming out of biology, and this is changing very rapidly. But also new algorithms, right? So in a sense, we're a dream. We are, if you want to see, double parasites, because we're looking for new unpublished data sets, but also for new artificial intelligence approaches that we can apply it to. And so in this case, you can now get RNA expression, so you can get the genome from single cells. And in this case, the idea was, well, if you get, let's say, about 1,000 cells and you can sequence each of the genomes, can you, with this information, then place it back in the embryo of the fly and where it was? So we organized this challenge. The paper is just going to be published, but it was also a pretty interesting challenge with the new types of data where the algorithms have not been benchmarked. So we're always trying to benchmark the algorithms to see which one are the best ones. Finally, the one I'm going to describe in a little bit more detail is this dream challenge on cell lineage reconstruction that we organized together with the Allen Institute. And so you can see here how we try really to partner with foundations or with pharmas that can give us their data from clinical trials or things like that to really curate and try to set this up as a machine learning competition where the data and the problem are very clearly posed so that people can try to solve it. So in this case, the idea is, every organism comes from a single cell, but it's very hard to kind of trace the lineage of all the cells at the end from the single one, right? And but new technologies have now helped. You can basically tag a cell, the first cell, and that tag is being mutated and transmitted to the following cells. So at the end, you end up with, let's say, up to, in the case of a little worm called C. elegans, you end up with 1,000 cells with different tags that are being mutated, and they can use to calculate the distance between the cells. And when I thought about this problem, I thought that, I got inspired by these papers. So as I said, I tried to follow, new approaches and new papers. And so this was a kind of cool reinforcement learning approach to solve the Rubik cube. And in a sense, the Rubik cube is also kind of a tree, right? You're taking a set of decisions in order to solve your tree. So I thought, maybe if we have enough data, we could use a reinforcement learning approach for reconstructing the tree of this little organism that you see here. Of course, it ended up that, as very often in biology, we don't have enough data. And Maria was talking about the huge amount of data that's now being collected, but it's still very often not enough to characterize well the mechanisms. I told you the size of the data set for the olfaction challenge. In this case, it was really only 1,000 cells. For this C. elegans. We also took advantage of these techniques where you can insert, if you want, an array in single cells and then follow how it's being mutated. And in this case, we were able to organize a challenge where the idea was this cell lineage tracing is actually, it's close to phylogenetics, right? When you're building trees of evolution, what you use is you use sequences of DNA to see which one is closer than the others. There was already a lot of algorithms being used, but nothing that looks like more machine learning. And we were happy to see that in this challenge, people use the features from each of the tags in the cells, and because we gave them examples of solved trees that we could get experimentally using video microscopy, they could actually train a gradient boosting machine to see which were the most important features and reconstruct a tree based on that. So I think in this case, we really, were able to innovate and to push the application of algorithms to, a relatively old problem. And so really what I'm interested from biological side is what can artificial intelligence bring to solving these problems? And to me, it can bring really three things. It can help you interpret the biological data that you're seeing. It can help you quantifying and hence making better predictions, but also hypothesizing on what is the underlying mechanism going on. And I put them in this order because hypothesizing is actually you're probably one of the most difficult problems to do because you need to have a clear idea of what models you want to use and how you want to apply them. And so, for example, in the case of the olfaction challenge, Benjamin Sanchez was using a model that was using graphical neural networks. And we had another idea, which is, let's use semantic embeddings, because at the end, you're trying to predict words. So how something smells, does it smell woody? Does it smell like anything you want, like a chilaquile maybe? And so we use the relationship between the words to make our model better. And that was a strong hypothesis, which is, can language and smell be close together? And so that's what I'm saying, that you need to basically know both fields well to try to really hypothesize on which is the best model to apply and what are the different features that you should use. So this is the part I just wanted to tell you about. So this is some of the lessons that we've learned. Of course, avoid overfitting and double dipping, as you see George here doing it. If there's a way to cheat in these challenges, people will. It's not really cheating, but they sometimes don't realize that you have to check 1,000 times the security of the data, because when you give information to participants, they are going to use it, whatever it is. Think twice before revealing any information, garbage in or garbage out. And in our case, crowdsourcing works. It's not just ensemble modeling. It's really 20 to 100 teams applying different methods at every step, so that really gives you a high diversity. So I just want to thank the people that are directors of DREAM, acknowledged here, and also we will have also a virtual event on DREAM on November 18 and 19. So if you want to join sorry if I took a little bit more time.
It's okay, Pablo. Thank you. I shared the DREAM Challenges website in the chat, so there you can see more about these projects. I just want to add that Pablo Meyer completed his bachelor in physics at UNAM here in Mexico, right, Pablo?
Yeah, exactly. So as you can see, I'm a fan of Mexico, but also of trying to simplify problems as physicists try to do, but try to steal from everyone.
Okay, thank you. So we are going to start with the questions. Some questions are from Menti and others from the chat. So I will begin with a question for Maria. And what is the biggest challenge of using AI to give significant discoveries in such a big genomic data set like the 100,000 UK Genome Project? How do you manage the privacy of samples?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So so a lot of these data, like 1,000 and other L1000 and other data sets, are publicly available, right? So there is no privacy really concern, because these are cell lines, so they are not actually humans basically coming. So there is no actually sensitive data, especially when you are working with data coming from cell lines. And that goes in general. So that's around privacy and how you manage that privacy. Now about the challenges when it comes to the data, reproducibility is number one. Like the data, it's not only, like as also Pablo was mentioning, it's not only sparse, and it's not only like, very little to start with. I mean, having a data set that you have 50 individuals actually run an experiment, that's already big. That's already like, one of the big clinical trial data, if you like, or any trial data. So, and that's the sizes normally that we're talking about data. So definitely as I said, the sparsity of the data, the size of the data normally is a big problem. Then the reproducibility of the data, because it's very difficult even to find the raw data. And even when those data, because normally they get processed in particular ways, like it's really difficult, like to understand what people have done with this data. And especially in the case of the L1000, it was actually a nightmare, the reproducibility, and how, because you need to basically reconstruct details like, how, from things like what were the protocols that were given the drugs, right? So when you submit the drug to a cell line, Do you give it every 4-hour cycle, 6-hour, 12-hour cycles? What does that mean? And a lot of times these are like microarray data, and then you have like 1,000 genes, and then there are imputation methods. So there's a lot of challenges around that, right? And when we try to unify data from, as I said, many different resources and bring them together, then there's a lot of things that we need to do in order to standardize this data, so make them speak to each other, basically. Otherwise, they are useless. So there's a lot of challenges around the quality, basically, of the data, and the size of the data, and the sparsity of the data. Those are the three main. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, and I have another question related to this one, to this last part, and I think any of you can answer. So we know that data in general has a lot of noise. How larger data set can help? It looks like problem of never decreasing sigma on high variance scenarios.
I'm sure Pablo will have more to answer to add to this, but from our perspective, I think that's the wrong question to ask, because the right question to ask, this is the data what we have, what can we do with that, right? So, I mean, it's not that we're going to be getting more data or better quality data from the one day to the other. So all of our efforts, like, if I think most of the time spent with our clients within Lifebeat is not actually picking which is the right deep learning algorithm to use over the data, but it's actually around how can we massage this data, how we can amplify this data, how we can clean noise, how we can standardize, right? And most of these tasks, people think that it's, we do really, like, I don't know, like really fancy stuff on the latest deep learning. Most of this really is like, it's very simple, like, statistical. It's literally very statistic, like very, very mundane math that we are doing, and very mundane tasks that we're doing over this data. And I don't know, Pablo, Jeff, if this, you guys will have more to add to this.
Pablo, do you want to add something?
Jeff, I mean, why don't you go ahead? I can complement, but I mean, I think in your case, Jeff, it's especially interesting because it probably is not that easy to get data, right?
I don't know. I mean, I think that I guess I would push back on this a little bit, right? Where I feel like a lot of times the hardest problem is, understanding the problem well enough to collect meaningful data. I will echo what Maria said. I mean, I feel like, a lot of times I feel like there's a lot of like excitement about all of the new like kind of deep learning methods and all of the new tools that are available, and yet I feel like so much of practically solving many problems involves sort of doing that hard work to understand what the problem is. So talking with people, understanding the problem well enough that you even know what you're trying to solve, and then doing that really to collect data, right? And in the case that we work in a lot with disability, it's a smaller part of the population for a lot of reasons. It may be harder to get access to people with varying disabilities. I put in the chat something about how one big problem I see just with almost every data set is if it's a data set about people, which almost every data set that we care about is somehow about people, people with disabilities are even more underrepresented than they would be in the general population, for a whole bunch of practical reasons and different things. But I guess all of these things combined to me thinks that the real hard problem isn't like figuring out how to run TensorFlow or something. It's basically understanding the problem, working with people, working through human-centered challenges, and getting the data, because that ultimately is what's going to help you solve the problems.
Okay, and now talking about people with disabilities and data sets, what are the best practices for including people with disabilities in AI data sets?
I think it's a really good question. I think asking the question is a really good first step. I think that there's kind of different levels, right? So I think one would be, I mean, we often see, like I was just saying, that the people with disabilities just aren't included in data sets at all. I think that's kind of like a first level. Are you even representing the population that you think you are trying to represent? I think the next step up from that is sort of understanding that, if there are kind of this huge distribution of abilities, how do you think about that, right? Because let's say, a large portion maybe do fit into sort of that norm of the distribution. How do you think about the people that are outside of that, right? And I think this varies by problem, where there's just unlimited terrible examples of where this wasn't done well, right? Where people with disabilities aren't understood by speech recognition systems. You saw an example of that in my talk. Or self-driving cars don't recognize people in wheelchairs as pedestrians, right? I think for your problem, there's probably a huge number of issues there. But if you actually think about it and start talking to people and think about outside of that norm, who are the people that are going to interact with this, who are going to want to interact with this or need to interact with this, and how do we make sure that they're properly represented, not only in the data set, but also in our metrics, right? Because if 1% of your data set, and that happens to be representative of some sort of ability, it's in there, you might say, wow, we got 99% accuracy on this task, and yet that would completely exclude a whole category of people, and that doesn't seem right. And so we have to go beyond that kind of these naive metrics that only look at accuracy across the whole population and think about, well, what does that mean for different people? How are the errors distributed? And how do we strive toward fairness, and even understand what fairness means in different contexts?
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Another question that is here in the chat is, what does it mean that a lot of this healthcare data is staying within private companies that might not share the data openly?
Maria, you want to go ahead first?
Sure. That data is not usable, basically. I mean, in healthcare as a whole, and from the space that we are coming, that it's all about curing diseases and preventing diseases. Data as such has the potential to save lives, right? So when data is not used properly and is not shared, then it actually is like you are not. It's the equivalent, the same to someone. What happens when you're not donating blood? People die, right? Because blood transfusions are needed. And it's a similar thing, like we need data to diagnose diseases. We need data to cure diseases more effectively. And case in point is everything we're going with COVID-19 and the coronavirus global crisis, right? Our platform, the Life platform technology, was chosen by the UK government to be the one that's going to be providing access and analysis over the data, the genomic and clinical data for 35,000 individuals with COVID, right? All of basically a big proportion of the individuals with COVID from UK, right? And we're expanding onto that. Now, why UK is doing that? It's because that's what's needed in order for people to be able to diagnose better patients, to be able to design vaccines, to design treatments, right? And not only that, because that's if you like, the short-term response to a disease crisis we're facing right now. But if you look at it long-term, it's actually a valuable cohort that will allow even, people like all of the people that are working with Pablo to come to it and try to understand infectious diseases as a whole, so we can then prevent a next coronavirus, right? So that's what it means. Now, imagine what happens if you do not have, a government like UK investing millions, right? And the level of national effort it requires to get data from 35,000 individuals to do that. And even when you have this data, you're locking them down and you're not making them available. Well, people die. It's as simple as that, right? At the end of the day, that's the end result. I'm sorry to be the one basically saying that, but I think we are all experiencing it more than any time before. And for us, it's sort of how can I say? It's on the one hand, it's really great that finally, companies, nations, governments are finally recognizing the need for population level data, and they are finally taking a lot of action and putting money into that. But at the same time, it's sort of very tragic to us that it had come to this for them to realize, right? Because population health has been a topic that we have been going about for more than at least 20 years that I've personally been in the field, right? And very little investment has gone to that. And then the same goes for also pharmaceutical companies and general biopharma and hospitals, that they were so slow at embracing digitalization, that right now they are facing all of the effects of that. And I think a lot of talks were also during this conference about from patient level management on like how many beds do we have availability to basically, which should be very mundane tasks, like they are not any near on like what do we need to design drugs, to all of the pharmaceutical companies that they had all of their clinical trials sites shut down because they had to close and they had nothing happen digitalized, right? So there is a lot of different problems that, it's not just data being siloed, it's also the level of digitalization as a whole, as well as the national and global effort that we're taking as a sector, private sector, but also as governments, right, and regulation, and what we're incentivizing.
Yes, totally agree with you, Maria. I think that during this crisis, different public and private institutions are now running to move towards digitalization, telemedicine, new collection of data, epidemiologists, mathematicians, and everything. And we could do more if this began earlier. So do you want to add something else, Pablo or Jeffrey?
I would just add that it's true that it's great to have the data, but it's true to have a clear data governance. And this is something that we have done in DREAM because, and in SAGE also is very important, right? See, if you're giving away your data, if you're a patient, right, if you have disabilities or you have an illness, and you want to have something back, but you also want to be able to trace and see who's using the data and doing what. And of course, now we're very conscious of that, and there are very strict rules. There's the GDPR, and there's things like that. So I think, of course, I'm all for crowdsourcing, but I'm also for accountability, who's using the data, where, etc. And this is really, really important. And there are situations where, patient privacy is sometimes more important. And Maria was talking about blood. Donating blood. Every country has a different model for it. In Mexico, actually, you have to give blood in order to give blood to someone who's ill. You have to find people around you so that they go and donate blood so that the hospital gives blood to the person that needs right away. This is a very different model than what happens in Argentina or in Europe or in the US where, you're collecting blood. So something just as simple like that already has all these different models. We did a challenge that was using, sorry, just to finish, that was using, mammograms for 100,000 patients. But the hospital, they had to be left private. So what you're doing now is you're federating models, right? You're pushing the models to the data so that you don't make it public and you still can have it kind of both ways. So there are many, different ways of doing this, but I agree that data is what's now, to me, defining the frontier of health and AI.
But Pablo, to add to that, it's exactly that, right? Like, yes, every country has a different way that they are governing, how you are donating blood, but every country has it, right? Because everyone has at some point acknowledged that, blood is needed to save lives. And I think it's about time governments especially acknowledging that data is the new blood that we need. And no matter what that governance look, and I agree with you, we should be having it, but we should have it to start with, and then, and have more population level projects by which we're collecting data in a more systematic manner, right? Especially around healthcare.
Yes, thank you. Just to close this Q&A, Pablo, we have a lot of questions, but if you can be brief. Many people is asking who can join the DREAM challenges and how can they, if they can join, if they are working in a lab that is generating data.
Yeah, I mean, DREAM again is made by the people that participate in it, and very often people that participate then organize challenges. And we're always looking for new questions, for new data. Again, one of the things we need is unpublished data, so that's not easy to get. So it's really about using our networks and finding new problems and new solutions. So anybody can shoot me an email if they have ideas. We have a different ways of doing this. DREAM is really about know-how. If you need a whole platform and engineers and things like that for your data, then we need some funding. But if you want to run it yourself, and there are many people that are able to do that, we'll just give you the know-how, and we're an open we don't even exist really legally, right? We're just crowdsourcing competitions and trying to publish the data and share the code, right? Those are the most important things.
Okay, thank you very much, Maria, Pablo, and Jeffrey. I'm very glad for being here with you. And please, to the attendees, enjoy the rest of the talks. After this panel, in 10 more minutes, more or less, no, 8 minutes, we will have a privacy testing talk of TensorFlow. So you will need to move to the stage. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias por acompañarnos. Estuvo increíble este panel. Tuvimos pláticas de Jeffrey Bingham, de Apple y CMU, que nos habló acerca de cómo se puede usar la inteligencia artificial para la accesibilidad. Y estuvo realmente muy bien. Nos vemos para las siguientes pláticas de RIIAA. Muchas gracias.